How's it going, YouTube? Got a pretty extensive patch going here. I'm pretty into this sound. I think it's really lovely. And I thought I would walk you through how I got here. Let's just turn it down a little bit. There's a lot to get through. I'm not going to explain everything in perfect detail, but I think it's worth covering a lot of what is happening here. Let's bring the cable opacity up a little bit. Just so we can, break it apart and figure out what is making all of these sounds. So let's just start right from the beginning here. And it's actually these two modules down here. You may have noticed that this patch is very heavily focused on the Sanguine collection of modules, many of which are clones of the Audible Instruments, or the Mutable Instruments if you go back far enough. The Audible Instruments are obviously just clones of the Mutable Instruments, but the thing that's interesting about these ones is they are clones of the Mutable Instruments, but they're often focused on a specific firmware. So in the case of, let's just turn this down a bit. In the case of, say, this Mortis, it says all-round gap filler based on the Dead Man's Catch firmware with some additions for Mutable Instruments peaks. So it's that kind of thing. It's like a user-made firmware or some specific firmware. So it's kind of just like expanded versions of the Mutable Instruments modules, which I think is cool. But there's more than just clones here. We've got this really amazing Euclidean sequencer just here. I'm using it everywhere in this patch. Euclidean sequencers aren't exactly rare in VCV, nor are they that different from each other, but I just really like the layout of this one. I really like the visualization you get up the top. It's just a good module. It's got some nice features. Excuse me. So, what am I doing down here with these instruments? So this module is, it's like I said, it's peaks from Mutable Instruments, but it's a really amazing module because you can use it as like an envelope generator, but you can also use it as a drum synthesis module. And that's what I'm doing here. I've got it set to bass or snare up the top and then digi drums down the bottom. Got these expander modules, which are actually new. They just came out. And they just allow us to have CV control over these knobs, which is very handy, and that's what I am doing here. So I kind of like this kind of like bouncy vibe, and let's just unmute this third track as well, because that's actually an affected version of track 2. So I just think that's a really nice sound. The affected part of it is going into this liquid filter, which is on bandpass, and then it's going into a delay. And then the dry signal is going to Werewolf here, which is like a wave folder, distortion unit kind of thing. The bass drum is just going into this LP4 filter from Slimechild. This is actually a paid module. I thought that I'd used all 3 modules in this patch, but I guess I'm using one paid module just here, which is fine. But yeah, that's going into a wave shaper from Surge. Love the wave shaper from Surge, really amazing module. All the Surge stuff is just fantastic. And I'm using Chordal here to do some light modulation on some of these parameters. So that's our sort of little bit of a nice percussive rhythm. But I've also got this big single voice up here. Let's unmute that. And I'm using a Newly here, which is a clone of Rings, I believe. Let's just check that really quick so I'm not wrong. Yeah, Rings. It's a resonator, just like Rings. Got it on the sim strings, I guess that's symmetrical strings. Got it on the polyphonic mode, 4-voice polyphonic. It's a beautiful sound. Absolutely love this kind of sound. I just love physical modeling. It's great. And I've got 4 instances of this Sphinx module, the Euclidean sequencer, all set to different timings. And they're all going into 4 ADDR sequences, which of course are being quantized as well. Everything in this patch is in the Locrian scale or mode, which I don't use very often, but I think it's a nice sounding vibe. And what makes this interesting though is I'm going into this new module called Solim from Not Things, which came out pretty recently. I'm just using the expander here. There's actually many expanders for this, but I'm just using this one expander, which allows you to change the octave of different inputs. I'm not sure I fully wrapped my head around all of the intricacies of this module, but from what I can gather, these 4 inputs are being, how should I say it? They're being limited by these 2 knobs here, the lower limit and the upper limit, and that's being modulated on the upper limit. But that's just kind of the frequencies. The range of frequencies is being limited at each end. And because you can modulate it, that makes it for some quite interesting results. But you've also got this sorting button down here, or switch. So if you've got multiple inputs, it will kind of sort between them. At least that's what I think it's doing. It definitely seems to be doing that. And then this expander, I've got the switch on the top one is set to higher, this one's set to none, that one's set to higher, and this one's set to none as well. You can do low as well. And it basically just sets that channel to a lower or a higher octave. It just means that you can do some interesting stuff with sequences. Like I've got 4 sequences going in here, and it's kind of just like mixing between them. And it's also modulating the upper end of the CV range. And I don't know, I just think it's a really nice melody we've got here. And it's kind of random, but it's also not random. Like we've got set sequences and it's just going between them, and it's the main modulation, the main thing that modulates it into a kind of random domain is this upper limit modulation here. So that's going into a Joris, which is a chorus from Volt. Quite like this chorus. And that's it really. It's got a bit of reverb on it, I believe. Track 4. Yeah. 2 types of reverb. Excuse me. I'm just recovering from a cold, so apologies for that. And yeah, that's kind of this half of the patch. Let's just get all of it going. And like that alone, I think is quite a nice patch. It's just very lush. So I'm a big fan of that. But I've added more over here, which let's get rid of these and let's put this on. So what I'm doing down here is I'm using this Marmora, which is a random sampler, so it's based on it's based on the Audible Instruments random sampler, which is in turn based on the Mutable Instruments marbles. But it's a great little module. This is really the first time I've used a version of marbles, and I just chose to use the Sanguine one because I like the layout of it. It's nice and spread out compared to the Audible Instruments one. But also, just to keep it consistent with the rest of the patch. So I'm running 2 sequences off this. 3 technically, but we'll get to the third one in a second. These are the 2 modules I'm using. They're both macro oscillators. One's based on braids, one's based on plats. And it's running off this Sphinx that's clocking it. It's quite slow. And it's pretty random. These sequences are quite random. But I am using this Deja Vu on this side, which is the pitch side. So it's at 61%, which means that it is kind of looping, but it's slightly, it's not looping completely straight every time. It's slightly different each time. If I take it all the way to the left, it'll be totally random. And if I put it right in the middle, it'll be completely looped. And the third voice I have here, which let's unmute that one. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking this third input, this middle input, I'm putting it into this as the source of this sample and hold unit called Dungeon. I'm clocking the sample and hold with another Euclidean sequencer running at a different rate. And the output of that is being quantized and going into another macro oscillator, this time Contextus, which is, I believe, based on yet another firmware. Let's just check it. Yeah, based on the Renaissance alternative firmware for Mutable Instruments braids. And that's going into this Realities reverb. It's just going into a wave shaper, which is then going into the texture synthesizer here, which is a Clouds clone, and it's called Artesia. And Artesia, or Tessia, I think it's Artesia. That's not what I meant to do. Is based on the Parasite firmware of Clouds. And then I have another Euclidean sequencer, which is controlling this attack decay. And it is, going into these 2 VCAs, which is the left and the right of the output of this Clouds module. So yeah, we get this kind of stuttering effect. I really like doing this. Like, I did a video about it, about amplitude modulation, but I really like this kind of vibe, especially like reverb then being amplitude modulated and then more reverb on that. It's just a really interesting sound, I think. And yeah, I'm doing a little bit of modulation on the steps so that it's never quite the same, and the rotation, and attenuating that with this dual attenuverter from AS. And yeah, that's just a nice little dreamy patch all on its own, really. Like I mentioned, I am using this quad VCA here called Velamina. It's pretty straightforward. It's just a quad VCA. Again, it is based on Veils from Mutable Instruments. So, you know, there's a theme here. So let's move on up, where we have a few more elements. Let's just bring them in slowly. Got this bass note, which I'm using Pizza from Bastel, which is a really nice oscillator that came out pretty recently. I did a video where I had a look at it quite recently. It's a bit of an FM module. I really like FM synths for bass. That's what it's kind of doing here. And again, I've got another Sphinx, which is controlling an ADDR sequencer. And that's going into another Solim just to give us that range. I am modulating the lower and the upper limits. And that is going into a quantizer. Just got a small AD, attack decay from Nisthi, controlling the output. A Dungeon over here, a sample and hold is just, yeah, it's the thing that's modulating Solim. So that's really nice. I really love that bass. Up here, I have another voice, another Sphinx, this time clocking Cartesia, which is a new module from CV Funk. I didn't have to use it, really. Like, it's got more features than I'm kind of using. I'm just using this first page, but there are four different like pages, and you can modulate between them. It's a pretty damn cool sequencer. Let's just unmute it, and in fact, let's just listen to that for a bit, because I'm sequencing water table here, which I have looked at a little bit before. It's a really nice sounding module. It's a little bit unruly, a little bit difficult to control sometimes, but I think it sounds fantastic. And got a lot of modulation happening, as you can see on this like scope here. And I have a brains here, sample and hold. All of the outputs that I'm using from the top are going into this slew from Black Noise, and they're controlling different elements. So we're just sliding between different parameters, like the position of the left and the right, and then the position of the output as well down here. I'm also controlling the feedback with an attack decay from Nisthi. All of that's going into a debritus, just with a tiny bit of fold on it. And then that's going out into a filter from Surge on a bandpass. And then finally into just this Mix 2. Don't really need this exactly, but it's just nice to have a volume control there. And I'm modulating the frequency ever so slightly here with an envelope, which is being, it's just so that it's not happening at full bore all the time. Like, it kind of fades in and out a little bit. And that's just a clock division of one of my clocks going into this gate mod to extend the length of the gate, because we need that when we want to go through a slow envelope. And that's pretty much the patch, except for this last element here. Let's bring in this bass again. And let's bring in this final element. So this is just a pad. It's really simple, really. I've just got a wavetable VCO from Surge and a filter. And I'm sequencing it with a Node Sequencer 16. Great little module from JW. Absolutely love this module. I just input the notes myself, but the great thing about this module is it's awesome for extremely random sequences. I'm not going to get into it here because I don't want to mess up what I've got, but great module. And yeah, I've got a tiny bit of LFO on the volt per octave input, just blending in a tiny bit of it. And I'm using an LFO on the morph as well. And this other LFO is actually just modulating the speed of the LFO that's controlling the pitch. So it's very subtle. but it's nice. And I've got some reverb on that up here on the mixer. And that's the patch. Let's go back to everything, shall we? I really love this patch. I mean, you know, I've already said it, but it's just when I make patches like this, I often just end up sitting there afterwards and just kind of letting it wash over me, because it just keeps playing forever and it's always a bit different, and I just love that about modular synthesis. You can just create these little sonic worlds to live in for a while, and I think that's pretty special. So yeah, that's probably going to do it for this week. Yeah, let me know what you think in the comments. Please like and subscribe, all that fun stuff. And I'll put this patch up on patch storage for you to play around with if you wish. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Bye.